all of that racing coming down to the final kilometres of one of the most iconic climbs in cycling history. It nearly all went pear-shaped. We did one of the fastest descents I've ever recorded in a race or any event, and I was nearly out of the race completely before we'd even got to the bottom of Mont Ventoux and the 20-kilometre ascent to nearly 2,000 metres of elevation to the finish. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Ed, and today I'm going to take you through my race perspective from this Gran Fondo Mont Ventoux. I am so excited to bring you this one. It is one of the very most memorable events, and the way it unfolded, and I cannot wait to share it with you today. So this Gran Fondo is one of the most legendary in the whole world. You can't get many finishes more iconic than having an event that finishes with a competitive nature like this at the top of Mont Ventoux itself. Now, this was actually my first time there, which makes it even more crazy, but I've of course done it many times on Zwift. If you didn't know, Gran Fondos are highly competitive amateur mass start cycling events that are worldwide, but in Europe are extremely competitive. Many riders actually base their whole career off of doing Gran Fondos and focusing primarily on those. And obviously it's a participation affair, so there's people of all ages and abilities, but at the very front it's a very competitive affair, and there's often a motorbike that will follow the leaders and take photos and videos and everything like that. So this particular event had two routes. There was the 100-kilometre and the 120-kilometre. Both had roughly the same elevation gain of around 3,500 metres, with the majority of that coming in the last 20 kilometres. So there was two sides to climb. If you did the short route, you would go up the south side, the shallower side, and if you were doing the route that I did, the 120-kilometre, you would go up the Bedouin side, which is the one that's most known. So before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to a friend and tour operator, Alp Cycles. Adi invited me along to do this event, so if it wasn't for Adi and the team, I would not have been given the chance to do this event. Big shout out to them, and if you're interested in packages for next year's event, you can check them out. So myself, Adi and Ollie, we travelled down in the van the day before and set up and got ready for the event. Well, we've arrived at the foot of Mont Ventoux, actually staying at the bottom of the Malacine side. Today is the day before the event, so we're gonna head out for a ride now. It's like 3 p.m. The event is about 7:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Probably gonna ride up the Malacine side. It's the first time here, so this is very exciting for me. Got my pre-ride nutrition today. This is a bag of Haribo, Zing Fest. Did you know there's a hack with a bag of Haribo? See that tab at the back there? You sort of like pull it down and it splits the bag in half. Did you know that? What do you do now?
Good morning, everybody. It's 5:15 a.m. We have just over an hour till the race starts. Just put the GoPro on. Do you know the new Wahoo as of today? I can control my GoPro via the Wahoo, so I might be doing that. We'll see if I can get the update done. This is the bike room. All set up, looking good. All right, everything's sorted. Breakfast, Weetabix, and away we go.
So my main goals for this event were first to gain experience at these type of events and learn how the front of the event unfolds and how people attack and react and play tactics. The other one is to give my best effort on Ventoux and see if I can be in a competitive range with these other riders, because at the end of the day, most, if not all, of the people in this group with me were French, and they live and train in the mountains for the most part. And of course, I wanted to film a video that was worthy of your time for YouTube. So regarding my equipment for the day, I was of course on my Factor or 2 VAM. but there were a couple of small additions, both clothing wise and equipment that I was carrying. So starters, I was running my left-sided 4i power meter. This was paired with a 5236 gearing with an 1130 cassette. Continental Grand Prix 5000 TT tubeless tyres measuring 28mm. These were set up on the 28-33mm black ink climbing wheel set. I had my GoPro Hero 9 up front with the new Wahoo Element version 2. I had a canister of Vittoria sealant as well as CO2 2-in-1, paired with my Django Rolls seat pack, which included some bare minimum tools, 2 TPU tubes and some tie levers. And because everyone had to wear the same event jersey, I wanted to gain as much advantage as I could by riding in the Rule 28 Aero base layer and of course the Aero socks. So after a fairly mundane first few kilometers as we made our way out of the village behind the neutralization, we actually got onto a big main road and began the event proper. 4,000 riders took to the start line, and when that whistle was blown, it turned into a full-blown road race situation. I did feel like I was back in the fast-moving peloton of professional bike racing. I knew that staying near the front was the biggest priority in the first 45 minutes of this event, so I needed to spend a couple of matches to be there. Although it wasn't too intense, a 286 watt normalized power for the first 26 kilometers and until the first climb of the day actually, even though we'd dispatched the Madeleine to get from Malacine to Bedouin, which many of you would have ridden if you'd been to the area. So the first part of the event was fairly standard. The 286 watt normalized power was well within range of my FTP. But on hitting the first real test of the day, the climb from Flassan, it was 8.5 kilometers at 5%, and it took us 22 minutes 38 seconds at a normalized power of 314 watts, which is the equivalent of around 5.2 watts per kilogram. Now what I noticed on this climb was that not only we had a surge at the beginning of the climb, but we also had a surge at the end of the climb. The surge came late and was 344 watts for 4.5 minutes. I could tell around about halfway up this climb that this was going to be the select group. We weren't going to drop many people from this point onwards because the road wasn't as challenging. We got onto a big main road, which is where we started to go fast. Now according to Strava, and I've been uploading there for the best part of 10 years now, I think. This is the fastest 5 miles I've ever done, the fastest 8 kilometers. And I averaged 75 kilometers per hour, or 46.6 miles per hour. It's the type of speed where you don't realize how fast you're going. Once you get over 70 kilometers an hour, it doesn't matter if you go at 80 or 90 kilometers an hour, it all tends to feel the same. We couldn't actually pedal down this descent, but I decided to stay near the back to avoid any of the battling that was happening at the front. Bearing in mind, the group now was probably only 30 or 40 riders in total. I want to talk about fueling, and in the recent Dylan Johnson video of the Unbound, by the way, congrats Dylan on the top 10 and the podium. Dylan talks about attitudes around feed zones in gravel events has changed, and it's now turned into a Formula 1 style pit stop where it's almost every rider for themselves. In these events, I think there's an unwritten rule, a bit like in road racing, where you don't really attack through a feed zone. There are feeds during this event. You can stop and fill up your bottles and grab food and things like that, but the people at the front, they don't do that. Instead, they have family or friends to hold bottles for them at the side of the road, and they'll grab them as they go past, and they'll space them out, along the route so that they can, they never have to stop effectively. Now, you can argue if this is right or wrong or unfair if you don't have somebody there, but just to give you the perspective, I didn't have anybody, so instead I opted to carry another bottle in the back of my jersey. Now, keeping on the theme of Dylan Johnson, I was thinking of having it down the front of my jersey, but to be honest, the jersey was very, very tight, and it felt very uncomfortable to have it down my front. So instead, I actually put a lot of gels down the front of my jersey and put the bottle in the back of my jersey. I decided to go for a purely gel and energy drink based nutrition plan. So relying on my nutrition partner Sturka, I actually relied on, I think it was 7 gel 50s, 50 grams of carbohydrates per gel, and then 2 750ml bottles with 90 grams of carbs in each of those, and then 1 500ml bottle which had 60 grams of carbs. So the idea was that I would consume one of the big bottles of 90 grams in the first hour or so with 1 gel, and then in the second hour I would defer to the smaller bottle of 60 grams because it was less intense, and I would have 2 gels or 1 gel depending on how I was feeling. And then in the third hour prior to the final climb, I would go back to the big bottle of 90 grams in preparation for the final climb, and I'd save a little bit for the climb, as well as obviously taking on the gels prior and during the final climb too. This worked out really well, and I didn't even come close at any point to being dehydrated or even hungry. So the next 26 kilometers was very conservative. The group had formed and people were just using the opportunity to fuel. This section of the route took us through the famous Gorge de la Nesque, which, fun fact, at its deepest point is around 400 meters down.
I'm not going to be able to talk too much today, but so far we're rattling along, average about 35k an hour. We seem to be climbing at about 300 and 330 watts, which is okay so far. We've got about 40k to the bottom of Mont Ventoux, and we've got the saying in my head today, like, everyone's a hero until you get to 100k, which is obviously the start of the climb. I mean there's a big gap now to any sort of group behind, and we had a heck of a descent just now, so hopefully I can stay in a sizable group to the bottom of Mont Ventoux, but it's heating up. Okay, that's it for me for now. See you in a bit.
211 watts normalized power was required to maintain position in this group for this hour section. As you could tell, that is fairly low. Not long after this, the route split and our group whittled down to only 30 or so riders. We then hit a 4.7 kilometer, 5.5% climb, which took 296 watts normalized power for 12 minutes 46 seconds. From the top of this, we only had 15.7 kilometers to the bottom of Mont Ventoux. Now, up until now, I'd done 83 kilometers in 2.5 hours, with 1,762 meters climbed, 1,957 kilojoules, 145 TSS, and a normalized power of 266. Now is the interesting part, because over the top of this and down into this descent was where things got pear-shaped. I was at the back, fueling and feeding as we got onto this fast section of the descent. We did the initial first minute or so, and then we took a very sharp right-hander onto the road that we'd climbed from Flassan, and it was very gravelly and very twisty. Some riders at the front were obviously feeling very good and confident, so they started to press on, and I was caught out at the back of the group as it was starting to stretch. I was in the danger zone, and what happened over the next couple of minutes was me getting dropped and distanced. I couldn't close the gaps, I couldn't take the risks in the corners because of the gravel, and therefore I lost contact with the group. Getting to the bottom there, we were literally only 5 kilometers, if that, from the bottom of the 18 kilometer climb or so to the top. What happened over the next hour or so is, quite frankly, one of the best hours I've had on the bike. And I'm not talking about power output, how I felt, and tactically how I carried out one of the best rides of my life. So at some point during the event, we were given some time checks from people on the side of the road. I didn't quite know what the time checks were, but I knew that there was a breakaway. Now I'm going to do my best to try and talk you through what happened over that final hour. We got onto the lower slopes of Mont Ventoux and we just about managed to get back on to the group that had left us behind on the descent. Everything had come back together, but as I rolled up to the back of the group, I realised that the pace was completely taken out of it. No one wanted a ride, and it was just a matter of waiting for the next few kilometres until the mountain started. At this point, I thought I'm going to go to the front. I'm going to ride around the group. I'm just going to see what happens. What happened was I rode off. I mean, I didn't plan for that to happen, but in hindsight, it probably looked stupid. Think of it this way. You're in the group, you see a rider going past, you question how long you have left to go on the climb. The climb hasn't really officially started yet. Mont Ventoux can destroy any rider if you don't show it respect. This is what I was told. Now, winning on top of Mont Ventoux is what dreams are made of. It's one of the most iconic climbs in the world. I hit the sharp left-hand bend, which to me signals the actual official start point of the climb. And the gradient for the next 9 kilometers, 10 kilometers, doesn't really dip below 9 or 10%. Now, turning left onto where I would say the climb officially starts, there was plenty of open road in front of me. I was in the headspace now of just time trial. Like, this is what I'm good at. I set my pace and I just ride it. And it's very relentless. The first 9 kilometers officially of Ventoux are incredibly steep. There's very little draft to be had if you're with any other riders. I remember looking back once or twice in the first couple of kilometers of the climb. Now, I didn't really know. I couldn't gauge if they were gaining on me or not, but I could certainly see that there were people going out the back of the group and there was more riders behind than there were in front of the group. So obviously people were set in a strong rhythm, but I was confident that as long as I could hold the group off for the first 15-20 minutes, then the motivation from the group to chase would start to dwindle. It's always difficult when you're in the position where you have to chase and you're chasing one rider and you're never getting any closer, and yet you can just see them just there. You know, the climb is so steep that they're only a couple hundred meters away, but it's going to take you a minute. It's going to take you a minute and a half to get there. So from where we turned and we got onto the climb, it was 18.4 kilometers at 7.9% average. But I would give a shout out here to the very nifty bike computer Wahoo, and to see that the average gradient remaining on the climb was actually decreasing as I was getting further up. So those of you will know that from Chalet Renard, from the next few kilometers onwards, the gradient starts to lessen and become less severe. And it was very motivating to not just see the kilometers tick by, but to also see the gradient remaining decrease. It becomes a lot more manageable. In my head, I was just breaking things down. And to be in the position where I'm going fairly hard here, I'm riding very close to my limit, but I'm still able to have this internal voice and rationalize and keep thinking about, okay, how many people are in front of me? You know, how far have we got left to go? What's the gradient for this next kilometer? What's coming up? Is there any shade I can ride under? All of these things I was thinking about, you know, if I can cut the corner ever so slightly without being on the other side of the road, I'll do that, you know. All these small little things I was just thinking about all the time. And I knew that it was, I was on a great day because I was able to think about that and I think about all these things at the same time. So the whole climb for me took 1 hour, 2 minutes, 59 seconds. This was at 328 watts normalized power, of 5.4 watts per kilogram and 95% of my FTP. The source add-on for Strava has an interesting metric in that it can estimate sea level power Now obviously we're climbing to 2,000 meters and it estimated my sea level power to be around 10 watts higher than my average. If we compare that to a sea level time trial I did a couple of weeks ago where I averaged around about 355 watts for 55 minutes, safely say that I performed fairly well with slight fatigue and obviously altitude and heat all being added stressors during this event. Now, Tour de France last came up here in 2021. They did 2 ascents of this side. Tadej Pogačar has the KOM actually from that day, of course, and the speed they went up there was incredible. No doubt doing 6 watts per kilogram or thereabouts. To be able to do that fresh is a big ask, but to be able to do that in a stage race on back-to-back days at the end of a big day as it was is incredible. So I finally reached Chalet Renaud. And just as I'm getting there, I'm seeing one rider in front of me with a motorbike. There were a couple of people stood on the side of the road and I asked them how many riders are in front. And I held up my hand. I was like, is there 3 or 4? And someone pointed at me and they said, you are 5. I am 5. So I saw this rider in front of me. I thought, right, here's the first rider. So as we came around the bend of Chalet Renaud, I rode up to the back of this rider and we were starting now this long process of going in and out of the mountainside to reach the summit. This is the iconic section. This is the bit that, you know, done on Zwift and seen in pictures, seen at the Tour de France. This is the only section where you feel like you're making progress and you can see the top. This section is also the section that suits me the best because it's slightly shallower and I'm also coming from behind. So I'm extremely motivated to see the riders that I'm catching one by one. Now at the time I can only see this rider in front of me and some people around who have also done the shorter route and they're also just coming onto that section from the other ascent. I ride up to the back and going into one of the first headwinds on this section, I decide to sit behind and see what the score is. On sitting behind, I realise that this rider is starting to struggle. I bide my time and I wait until we're just about to turn into the tailwind and I ride past. Now on riding past in a tailwind means that generally if a rider's tiring, you can get a slight gap on them because the tailwind is the only section where mentally they're going to think about getting a break. So I make my move and I get a small gap. We turn into the next headwind and I'm making progress and now we're approximately 5 to 6 kilometers from the summit. For reference, by the way, the Tommy Simpson Memorial is about 1.2, 1.3 kilometers from the top. So now I'm in 4th place. Is a podium position up for grabs? You'd think so, but I couldn't see any riders in front of me. Not for my event, at least. It was very difficult to distinguish who was in my event and who was in the shorter event. Now at this moment in time, I'm going past riders and I can start to see another rider in front that has another motorbike with him. So I start to head towards that rider. I get across that rider and without hesitation ride straight past. This rider is obviously on their last legs and all of these riders have been in the breakaway for a considerable amount of time. I don't know how long exactly, but they've obviously been out there for a while working together. But they're now splitting up and they're on their own. So I'm now into 3rd position. We're approaching about 2.5 kilometers to go. And I start to see what can only be described as a battle going on up front. There's 2 riders riding side by side with another motorbike. Now, this motorbike rider looks like to be a proper camera motorbike as opposed to a motorbike rider that's just a marshal or, you know, police that was looking after the other riders. So I assume that this one is the front of the race, but I could be wrong. I don't actually know at this point. So getting into this last 2.5 kilometers, I know we've got, you know, around 5-10 minutes of riding still to go. We're still in a lot of headwind, and the last section, I was told prior to the event, that last bit is steep as, and you have to save something for it. And if you've got a headwind, it's even worse. We did actually have a headwind. And eventually I get to these 2 riders, and one of them attacks the other. I'm within probably around 10 seconds, 15 seconds at this point of bridging across to them, so I can see all this unfolding. There's a big attack, he hits him on the left hand side of the road, and he sits down and he drives on. Now at this point, I'm thinking to myself, this could be the end. Like, if this is the front of the race, I might not get across to that rider that's just attacked. Like, he's attacked at a perfect time when I'm just coming across to them, because although he probably doesn't know that I'm coming from behind, he does know that he's only got 2 kilometers left of the event. So he's going to go all in from here to the top now. Like, everything. There's no point holding back. So if he's going all in and he holds me off, then there's a very real chance that I'll come second, I'll come third. Now at the time, remember, like, I didn't even think I could bridge across to the breakaway. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what the gap was. You know, at one point I was in a group of 30 that was maybe 2.5, 3 minutes behind. So the way this is unfolding in front of me is just incredible. Like, I almost can't believe it, and it's filling me with adrenaline. It's filling me with excitement just being there within a shouting distance, and it's bringing out all of that racing, like, nature and the thing that doesn't really come out a lot with me. It was coming out there because it's been a long time since I've had this opportunity presenting itself like this, falling right in front of me. And it was like it was meant to happen because of the way it happened. So I make my way up to the guy who's now in second place, and his head has dropped. You can see he's pedaling squares and puts up no fight whatsoever when I ride past. I see the motorbike with the leader, and the gap is not increasing. If anything, it's coming back pretty quickly. So I know that this move that the rider's made to drop the guy in second, he obviously knows that that's his move to potentially win the event. Like, he's not seen anybody else come from behind maybe, so I'm assuming he thinks he's made this big effort, he now knows he's dropped that rider, and he's just getting to the finish now. But he's slowing down. And whether or not he's slowing down through tiredness, I don't know, but at this point I'm just chasing up to that back wheel. And as I get there, a big bus comes up from the left hand side. You wouldn't believe it. It actually blocks some of the wind that's coming off, like, really strongly from the left hand side. So I get a tiny bit of shelter as I'm closing that gap for the final time. And I get up to the back wheel and I do the same thing as I did with that rider back in 4th place. And I just sit there quietly. And the rider in front of me, Julien, looks across, sees the camera bike, sees somebody over his shoulder, and then just looks back. There was only one thing I was going to do, and that was to go straight through. I rode straight past, and I just rode the tempo that I had been riding the whole time. That 330 watt sort of just mundane TT effort that I knew had got me across to all these riders in the first place. And on dropping Julien, 30 seconds later, I had about 800 meters left of the climb to go. And it almost felt, and looking back at the footage, I could see that where I got across to Julien, it was right as we passed Tommy Simpson's memorial. But those last 800 meters where I was riding on my own, I had to confirm with the motorbike that I was in first place, and they had to confirm with me that I was in the 120 kilometer event and not the 100 kilometer event. I turned around the final bend, the iconic final bend, drinking game for the word iconic, come round, and there's the finish. And I crossed the finish line, and I don't know what to say. It was like it was truly the most unbelievable way to ride myself back into contention, when really at that point, at the bottom of the climb, it was a question of, was this even the right move or not? And my official time for the timed segment of the climb was in the 58 minutes 20 second range, which was nearly 2+ minutes faster than the next rider. So in hindsight, if I hadn't have made my move at the bottom of the climb, I would never have got across, and I certainly wouldn't have caught, the leader with such a short amount of time remaining. And that's it. That is the event in all its entirety. Like I said, it was one of those days where things just went into place and you couldn't make it up. The way it unfolded, you just could not make it up. So special thanks to all my sponsors, supporters, you guys for watching. If you're new, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button. Comment down below your favourite part, or if you fancy doing this event one day. And I will see you in the next one.
Le troisième, Tim Coppens, qui termine sur la troisième, Tim Coppens, pardon, quatrième donc, de l'épreuve. De chaleureux applaudissements avec Fabien dans sa 3800. Alors, on va la féliciter, je ne peux pas venir. Le bien Delphine, je dis à la tour micro, je ne peux pas me déplacer. Trois finisseurs qui sont en train de nous rejoindre.